Hi, I'm Naureen Khalid, your host on The Late Show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. I have some fabulous guests on tonight. I will be chatting to Sean Hofford about Ofsted, Mayan Wakeford about her journey into teaching, and Mike Thane about SLT line managers and their relationships with subject specialists.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
A very warm welcome to you all. Great to have you with me. This is your show, so do join in with me and my guests by calling in, by texting, or using social media. If this is your first time tuning in, or you'd just like to find out a bit more about us, then please head over to our website www.ttradio.org. If you have thought about hosting a radio show of your own but didn't know where to start, then our website has details about how to get in touch with us. The team will be delighted to hear from you, and you may become our latest host with a show of your own. I have three fabulous guests on tonight, so grab your cup of tea or coffee and your favorite biscuit and enjoy the next hour and a half. Before we chat with our guests, let's first head over to the news desk where Gail Glenn has the latest educational news for us.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Jeff Barton, General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, has expressed concerns over the pressure being placed on teachers by some families who are anxious to ensure their child secures grades required for university. He has told MPs that the union is offering legal advice to members on how to cope with parents who say they have a lawyer ready to challenge any grade which they do not agree with. Kevin Courtney, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, has voiced concerns about huge workload implications for staff over the summer. Students will find out next month what grades they have been awarded. The Department for Education has released figures which show that almost 1.5 million students were absent from school in England last week. The figures indicate that 840,000 were absent for COVID-related reasons and 630,000 were absent for other reasons. Kevin Courtney, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, told the Commons Education Select Committee that some students absent for non-COVID reasons would be suffering from mental health issues. Nick Brooke, Deputy General Secretary of the Association of Head Teachers, said that the attendance figures made for grim reading and showed that the DFE had lost control of the situation. A Year 4 class from Castle Park School in Caldecott are walking or running the entire length of the Wales Coastal Path virtually. Pupils are uploading their mileage into the website endtoend.run. At the end of the 870 miles of the coastal path, pupils will receive a collective medal as well as an individual certificate. To help the environment, pupils have asked for a tree to be planted rather than receiving the usual t-shirt. This has been your latest Teacher Talk Radio News.
Live from London, This is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's just after 8 o'clock on Wednesday, 14th of July. I'm Naureen Khalid, your host on The Late Show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. I have some fabulous guests on tonight. I will be chatting to Sean Harford about Ofsted, Mayan Wakeford about her journey into teaching, and Mike Thane about SLT line managing subject specialists.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome back. I'm just waiting for Sean Harford to call in. While we wait for him, let me tell you about when I first met Sean. This was some years ago. He was there was a event where with Sir Michael Wilshaw, and I think it must have been the launch of the old new framework. So during the question answer session, I asked a question, and I wasn't really satisfied with the answer I got, but because there were so many people ringing in, waiting to ask questions, I I didn't press my point anymore. So later on, Sean found me. He came and chatted with me, talked with me, and that's typical of Sean. That is this type of man he is. He engages with you. He doesn't mind a challenge, and I think he and Mike Landingwall before him have made Ofsted look a bit more human, I think. So I hope Sean will be able to join us soon. And I think we've got quite a few people in the studios. Mayan probably has entered the live studio. Mayan, if you'd like to call in, we could perhaps take you in before and join and chat with Sean when Sean comes in. Would you like to call in, and then I can admit you? So that was how I first met Sean. Although he was supposed to be speaking right after the break. And if you're anything like me, if you are supposed to be going on after a break, the last thing you want to do is chat to somebody you don't know. But that didn't faze him. He came in, he talked with me, sort of satisfied me about what I had wanted to ask, and then went on and did his speech. So, and since then, I've sort of met Sean off and on at various conferences, and mostly on Twitter, where he was, really a really good person to have on Twitter. You could ask him questions. You could say, I've had an inspection. It hasn't gone the way I wanted. I've got some concerns, and he'll always say, "Well, DM me or email me," and he'll take that forward. So it was always really good to be able to do that and have somebody there to speak to Ofsted. So I'm still waiting for Sean to join us. Mayan, I can see there he is. So he's just coming in a minute.
Can you hear me, Naureen?
I can. Welcome, Sean. Thank you for joining us.
That was complete ineptitude on the technology front. My fault entirely. I could hear you, and I was desperately trying to get in, but I think I'm in now anyway. So
yes, that's fine. Well, I was just telling people how I met you for the first time I met you and had a conversation with you. It was I'm sure you wouldn't remember this. This was when Sir Michael Wilshaw had.
I do.
You do? Oh wow!
Yeah. It was in the the very fine church in Westminster where I think we held. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go on. Sorry, I butted in.
No, I'm amazed you still remember that. So I was saying that after Sir Michael stopped did his speech, and I wanted to ask a question, and I did, but I didn't want to ask too many follow-on questions because it was Sir Michael Wilshaw speaking, and everybody had a question to ask, and I wasn't going to hog the microphone for too long. but you must have seen that I wasn't quite satisfied and I had some further questions. And then you came and found me during the tea break or whatever it was. And we sat on the side and we had a conversation. And, I said what I wanted to do and you listened and you sort of reassured me. So that was really good. And I thought, well, this is a man in Ofsted I can work with. So thank you for that.
I think you were with Joe Penn, I think, if I
I
remember rightly.
Yes, I was. Joe, if you're listening, she's at the minute in Yorkshire, sunny Yorkshire, having a holiday. I hope she's listening in. But yes, Joe and I, a double show. We sort of try and go to events together. And,
Very good.
right.
Very good.
So, Sean, your journey to Ofsted. Tell us a bit about that. How did you come to be the face of Ofsted for so long?
Oh well, obviously I was in teaching. I kind of meandered into teaching via accountancy. To be fair, I went to university with a view to going into teaching, and then kind of got waylaid in the heady days of the late 80s into accountancy. Did that for 4 years, and I did my PGC at Warwick actually. But when I went into teaching, I was a head of science and then an assistant head teacher. And I guess I got into Ofsted really because at the time I was looking for deputy headships, but there was literally nothing coming up in the local area. I didn't really want to move my children to go for a job because I'd been moved around a lot as a child. I went to 6 different primary schools myself. And so I looked for other jobs, and actually the HMI job was advertised, and David Bell was the chief inspector at the time. He was looking for probably the younger HMI than they'd had previously. I was 36 at the time. And I looked into it and I felt, yep, that sounds like a great job for a couple of years, get some experience, then go back out into the sector. And one thing after another happened really, and so 18 years later I'm still here and just about to depart, of course. So.
We've just had a text message saying, Sean, we miss you so much.
Oh, that's very kind. Very kind.
How has Ofsted changed during your time there?
Wow. When I joined Ofsted, it was in 2003, and it still had many of the HM Inspectorate HMI, i.e. the organisation before Ofsted. So there were lots and lots of great people. There were some real oddballs too, but it was very much a kind of a divisional organisation. So we were in small groups. So the group I was in was called the School Improvement Division. It was about 40 to 45 of us, and we covered the whole country, going around to schools in special measures and serious weaknesses and what have you. And so you knew you were kind of part of an organisation, but a very like a tiny part of it, and we didn't really talk to each other very much. Since then, I think it's become much more of an organisation. We're much more connected, and I think that's partly technology and what have you, but also the way the place is managed and led now. So back in those days, it was kind of small and intimate. It's a bit bigger now, but I think we probably know our people more across the country anyway than we did.
Right. You've talked about people who were employed before. Why did you think there was a need to change how inspectors are employed? Why did you bring that in-house, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, so when I joined in Ofsted, it was all in-house all the HMI were obviously in-house as they are now, and there were over 100 contractors who did various different inspections for us. In fact, Frank Norris, who I know is still on Twitter and used to be the CEO of Co-op, he ran one of those contracts actually with him and a friend of his called John Gornall. They both became HMI subsequently actually, and there were lots of these small contractors. Then we went to a system where we had 3 large contractors that did the North, Midlands and South. But what they effectively did all the standard inspections for us, and HMI kind of did the monitoring and monitoring and quality assurance. But what we found difficult was to actually train those, as they were called, additional inspectors in those days, because the contracts didn't allow us to train them directly. The firms had to themselves. What we found, therefore, there was a kind of a break in the chain between what we wanted to be the clear messages and what actually got through at the end. And so we decided, and that was under Michael, to bring inspectors, the as they called then, the Ofsted inspectors, bring them in house effectively and contract with them directly. And what that did was enabled us to directly train them. So then HMI were training those Ofsted inspectors, and what we found that therefore was that it became much easier to influence and get consistency by doing that. So that was really the drive under Michael to make that happen.
Yeah, I was about to say that if you had different people contracting and you weren't able to train anyone, then consistency probably wasn't there as such.
Yeah, I mean, we had systems and processes to try to make it more as consistent as possible.
Yeah.
But it just made it more difficult than it needed to be. And so and since we've been able to, I mean, I have the training department for inspectors in my directorate. Since we've been able to, work on things and then directly do that training ourselves, it's a more seamless process. And as I say, I think the consistency has improved since then.
Thank you for that. So since we met all those years ago in London, we've got a new framework now. So why was the need for a new framework? What could the old one not be tweaked to make it better? Why change the framework completely?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things. So I took over the national director job in 2015 when the common inspection framework was put in place, and that was kind of an iteration in bringing our school inspections under the same umbrella as our further education inspections and our early years inspections. And that was the framework that had the outcomes judgment in it. It had fewer judgments, but it had the outcomes judgment in it as a standalone. And what that did was, and this is not to say outcomes aren't important for youngsters, of course they are, but what it did was it encouraged schools to focus on the kind of scores on the doors more than we wanted. It was about the numbers that could be achieved, but not necessarily how they were achieved. And it wasn't necessarily about what pupils were actually learning or should be learning. So, I mean, what that gave rise to, of course, was the kind of nonsense around, putting children through the European computer driving license to get extra points on the board. Previous to that, under the framework before the 2015 one, it was the kind of GNVQ ICT, worth 4 GCSEs, which everyone knew it wasn't. And so that kind of approach was encouraged, if you like, under that outcomes judgment separate to everything else. What we wanted to do was kind of nudge schools to think more about what they were teaching and what pupils were actually learning. And that was really the kind of catalyst for the focus on the curriculum, what it is that schools are wanting children to learn, and when and why. And so that was the need. It couldn't have been tweaked to get to that, frankly. It needed, a more of a change. And I think, and we may get into this in a bit, but, the focus on the curriculum certainly has had benefits, I think, although, of course, we only had 6 months of it before we all went into lockdown. So some of that is still to be confirmed.
We've got a question coming in. Was the new framework at least partly informed by the games schools were encouraged to play by organizations such as Pixel?
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's a great question, and totally. That was the worry that the kind of behaviours that a separate outcomes judgment encouraged led to things like Pixel, which I mean, they do some good work around CPD and stuff like that. But the problem was that those kind of tricks of the trade to just get the scores up were the things that were leading schools into doing things that, if they didn't have that incentive, or they wouldn't have done so readily. So yeah, absolutely, that was one of the drivers, and I'm trying now to kind of discourage that kind of thing. And also looking out for those the kind of qualifications, like I mentioned earlier, and sort of move them out of the thinking. If you get something in P8, of course, and it drives a certain score up, lots of schools do it, that will have less of an impact on the judgment now. Now we're
Mhm.
looking at the curriculum, because clearly that doesn't have any impact on the curriculum, if you like.
Yes.
So that's why it's important. Yeah.
Has the new framework made people, I see all these people who are saying, oh, we have to get somebody in to tell us how to write our impact statement, and that must be put on the website, and we have to pay consultants to come and do and tell us how to do that. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's sad. I mean, again, we've done work on kind of myth busting over the years, and I can see how these things kind of come to fruition. And one of those things that came out of the new framework, when we were certainly when we put 2 years development work into that, and very early in that piece, probably 20 months in, we were talking to schools and school leaders and everyone across the country about this. I think we consulted about directly with like 20,000 people, and you know one of the things came out of that was when we started talking about the kind of intent, implementation and impact within quality of education, is people said, oh, you need to write these in, there needs to be an intent statement. Actually, we made this clear once we'd heard this, but these things gather momentum, and we wanted we wanted to get across the message. Actually, the intent is what your curriculum is. It's the content of your curriculum, and whether that's at the subject level, or looking wider, if you take the lens out to the whole school, and that's the intent, not these kind of sort of mission statements and things.
Yeah.
So and that's what, but people grab hold of these things, don't they? And it's quite
Yeah.
hard to stop it happening, but you have to try hard and keep at it.
Yeah, I would say to any school leader listening, don't pay anybody to come in and write your intent statement. If you don't know what your intent is, then how can somebody else come and tell you what it is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and coming and asking someone to come and write your intent statement is effectively asking to come and write your curriculum for you.
Yes, yes,
All the content of it.
yeah. You just mentioned myths, and you did a lot of work, busting myths. What are one or two myths that just refuse to die?
Well, I'm sure there's some alive and kicking in the far reaches of the country. But I suppose one of the ones that causes teacher workload that we still hear some of is around early years, actually,
Mhm.
and and having to have a post-it note or a photograph of children doing things, and then printed out and then stuck into books to show that the child did measure that water from one measuring cylinder or jug into another. It crazy. And we were really clear. In fact, as I was as I was trying to get into your podcast, and I was listening to the news being read, and Kevin's name was mentioned a few times. Back in the day, Kevin used to sort of message me to say, "Oh, there's a myth come up about early years teachers having to photograph work. What can we do about it?" And by the afternoon, we'd worked together to put up a slide that said, you really don't need to do that. And it'd gone on Twitter, and then people had seen it. But of course, not everyone's on Twitter.
Yeah,
So, but that kind of thing
yeah.
sort of carries on, which is a shame.
Yeah, one of the myths which you helped lay to rest, hopefully, is that governors aren't not allowed to see the draft report or find out
Yeah.
the judgment unless they were there in the room with the inspectors, and that went on for quite a long time. And we used to hear about governors who said, we've been inspected, but I don't know what happened because nobody will tell me, because they say if we tell governors, the judgment will be changed.
Yes, yeah, and actually, I mean, if I go back in the annals of time, I suspect at some point that may have been said. That because there was this kind of secrecy around the report.
Mm.
If you were a governor and you weren't in the room, you sorry, you missed out. I suspect, if you go back far enough, it probably was a thing. So more than a myth, it was something we probably changed
Mhm, mhm.
because we saw the light in that area, and then we published it, and then and then said in the handbook, no, you really are allowed to see it,
Yes,
and stuff
right,
like that. So
right.
some of these things were myths because they were never true in the first place. Other things did happen, I
Yeah.
mean, the marking thing absolutely was something that we said about, because it came off the back of a good practice morning or afternoon that an HY spent with a school in London.
Mm.
And just because with that school, what was then called dialogic marking was working, and the school themselves pointed to this being a significant part of their improvement journey, because presumably they needed it, and presumably also because the school itself had taken away other things to try to manage the
Good.
teacher workload. Then
Sure.
it worked for them, but of course it doesn't work for everybody, and we put it up as a best practice, and off it went. And so that kind of thing was true, that we did look at marking in that way, and
Mm.
then when we changed the policy to go away from that, it still held on for a while. But so yeah, I think we need to be clear. Some of these things are myths, and something did happen, but
Yeah.
we've put our house in order on some of them over time.
Again, that's really good to hear you sort of say that, because like I say, you're one person who's quite open about mistakes made and learning from them and moving on. What a question about early years photos from Mike 10. He says, is this message uh, about early years photos, etc., being actively sent to early years providers, childminders, etc., or not?
Well, we have no way. There are 45,000 childminders. There are about 75,000 child care or early years providers on our
Mhm.
registers. And so actually getting message to them is difficult in that respect. What we've this that kind of thing was more prevalent actually in reception in schools, so that part of early years, and we've actually, I'd have to check actually whether we wrote it into the front part of the handbook, where we said
Mhm.
Ofsted don't need, because we incorporated the myths into that.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it was, but that kind of thing, no, it's not a sort of thing we send messages directly. We very rarely, because of workload issues,
Yeah.
we never messaged schools or early years providers directly with this stuff anyway, because many years ago the DfE had a rule that you can't do it, and it's for good reason, because they were getting bombarded with emails from central government. So
We've got another question coming in. How do we communicate to our SLT as classroom teachers that these things are myths? Example, triple marking, curriculum intent statements. If the message isn't coming through, how does a classroom teacher tell the SLT that no need to do
yeah.
this?
Well, I mean, that was the whole point of of incorporating what was the Mythbuster kind of separate document into
Mm.
the current inspection handbook. So if you look at the front of it, there's a section, and it sort of starts off with Ofsted will not, or Ofsted doesn't, or Ofsted does, will, or something like this.
Yes.
And actually the marking thing is very, very clearly in there. I'm not sure about the curriculum intent statements, to be honest. And really that's usually at a senior leadership level anyway, because people interpreted that as being about, as I say, kind of mission statements. But certainly if you have a look at those, the things in the front of the handbook, and absolutely take them to your SLT and point to them, because they're very clearly
Yes.
kind of set out there.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on now. I don't know whether you've seen this or not, but the Heads Roundtable have published their alternate white paper in which they call for reforms to Ofsted. Most notably, they want grades to be removed. What are your thoughts about that?
Heads round table calling for Ofsted to be removed is probably more of a headline, to be
Yes.
fair, or not.
No.
No, well, I mean, removal of grades. Look, the thing, and this is kind of a message that I've had to, and I totally believe in it, but I have to, we've had to keep pushing for many years now, is that, Ofsted is there for children. It actually, the statute that set up for us puts us in place. It was off the back of the Parents' Charter, actually. But what it was set up to do was to effectively defend the rights to a great education for children, and the parents, as part of that, obviously to for their children. So lots of people say to me, well, isn't good for schools, but actually what it's proved to be over many years now is a very clear and simple way for parents to understand
Mhm.
what kind of school they send their children to, and if it needs improvement. Now, I mean, the the art, of course, is to make sure that or try to make sure that people read beyond that grade and then look at the unique bits of the school that come through in the report. And that's been a work over time, really, from a report that kind of was over like 70 pages when I was teaching, and then came through to more like 10 and is now more like 3. Really to try and get the messages over in a very clear and quick way to parents, because they are the main, if you like, constituency. The thing that schools need to do with inspection really is really engage with the discussion at the point of the inspection. The report is the kind of public facing part of it, and grades get that message across. And in government of over time, many different government departments or arm's length bodies or inspectorates, etc., regulators have also adopted that the grades approach. Clearly, it has its difficulties. But in essence, what it does is get messages across really quickly. So that's why I think it's wrong. It would be wrong to get rid of grades.
We've got a question from Mabel who asks, what do you think about the so-called outstanding schools that haven't been inspected for 10 or more years?
I think they need to get ready to be inspected, because we're going to be doing that. The government lifted that. It was actually when I was seconded to the Cabinet Office back end of last year that the Secretary of State lifted that exemption, which had been in place for some time. Of course, the timing of when it was brought in meant that some schools had been sitting on an outstanding grade for about 5 years at that point, and then it was brought in, of course, and that's transpired that a few hundred of them actually have been not inspected for 14 years. That's going to change over the next.
I seem to have lost connection. Oh, Sean has. Sean, can you hear me? It's either my network has died or Sean's has died. Can somebody please message me and let me know if Sean, I can't hear Sean. I'll wait around a bit. Maybe he'll I think much. Oh, thank you. I'll just wait till hopefully Sean, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. So maybe try logging out and logging back in again. So that was interesting. But so any outstanding schools which are out there which haven't been inspected, get ready, Ofsted's coming for you. Personally, I think. Oh, hi.
Am I back now? I think I dropped out.
You're back. Yes, you're back. Oh, so where were we? Yes, outstanding schools. So you are, they will be inspected. So eventually, if how would you decide which one? How will you decide the running order of going about inspecting them?
So mostly the time since they were inspected last. We've said that we would go with a Section 5 inspection to all those who had their last inspection previous to September 2015. And then those that have been inspected post 2015 will get a Section 8 inspection. But basically, yes. So they'll be inspected probably over the next 3 or 4 years.
Yes. Okay. Good. I mean, this. I quite agree that this was a long time coming. They really do need to be inspected. Now, once some inspections happen and people are not happy with that, and they complain, one of the complaints about the complaint is that it's Ofsted marking their own homework. Do you think there should be an independent body to look at complaints against Ofsted?
Well, I mean, effectively there is, because we have the independent complaints adjudicator, which is a body that looks at our handling of complaints, and it's the it's the sort of end of the process with us once we've looked at it and we've given our assessment of the complaint and responded. The complainant can go to the what's called ICASO, Independent Complaints Adjudicator, something other Ofsted. So there is that look, and of course within our complaints process already there is a point at which someone from the sector is on a panel that looks at the complaints. So, in essence, there's probably as much third party looking at complaints about Ofsted as there is of anybody really. I mean, one thing, and this is not to be flippant about it, but if you have if you go to Marks and Sparks and buy a jumper and you don't and it doesn't isn't what you want, or it is not of the right material or what have you, you take it back, and what do? They give you another jumper, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So in part it's about all we could do is do another inspection. And that is one of the outcomes that can be from if you didn't like that inspection, okay, so and we can see why, here are the reasons, okay, we can do another inspection. So that's what we can do, but certainly the independent part comes in that look at it by ICASO.
Do these second inspections, yeah, how common is it for the grade to change after a second inspection?
Well, I mean, there's a process called where inspections are deemed to be incomplete, and that's through the quality assurance process, and that can lead to other inspections. The process now, though, is that actually we don't publish a report before a first complaint is looked at. That's something we change. So often we'll clear up the issues before we publish the report anyway. Of course, the follow-ups that then lead to step 3 or into ICASO will be after publication. But the change, I mean, that many of the changes are made actually before we even publish the final report.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Changing tack slightly now. So you've recently Ofsted's published the review into sexual abuse in schools and colleges, which made for really shocking reading. What prompted this review?
Well, the Secretary of State commissioned us to do that review, but of course that was on the back of the Everyone's Invited website, where mainly young women had posted incidents to raise them to the attention of people. And of course, that went into initially many hundreds, then many thousands of citations on that website. Clearly saying that they'd been treated badly by their fellow pupils, either in school or out of school. It was kind of linked with the school in some way, but many of them were actually out of school. But either way, the school was the kind of common factor, and they were effectively sort of raising this as that things hadn't been done by those schools or hadn't been taken seriously or what have you. Very, very complex situations, but the Secretary of State wanted us to look into this, so we did this fairly rapid piece of work. But that's where it came out of, Naureen, that initial commission.
Were you surprised at the findings?
I think I've heard the phrase, and I think this is really encapsulated. Shocked but not surprised. I mean, the Feminista and NEU, I think they were NEU and maybe NEUT then, had carried out a survey in 2018 that identified lots of the issues. That was while we were also looking at the issues, training inspectors, developing the new framework, and we put in the new framework, following all that development work, an action for inspectors to follow up on, for schools to have to give us their reporting on incidents of this nature, of sexual harassment, sexual violence, and that we would then consider that as part of the inspection. And we actually in the EIF since September 2019 through to the end of March, a small proportion of schools only had reported incidents that they said, here they are. A bunch had sort of no returns, so saying no, there were no reports of it. And so in some respects, we were surprised that, considering what had been said in the Feminista survey and how prevalent it looked, that schools weren't having these things reported to them. But of course, this is partly because mainly young women have become kind of inured to this. It become a kind of an accepted to them part of their working their school life. And I will stress both in and out of school. So you know, and social media and all kind, you know, messaging and what have you, all these kind of things. So that was the scale of what the young people told us. We talked to over 900 pupils directly about this. The scale of it, and that was in interviews. The scale of it was actually the shocking thing, really,
Mm.
and also what mainly young women were being asked to do and for, and the kind of positions they were being put in and pressurized. That's shocking.
So when you go into schools now, are inspections or the questions inspectors are asking, will they change in light of the findings of this review?
Well, what I mean, it was, as I say, it was in the framework to look at this and follow it up. Very
Yeah.
little was coming through. But one of the things we found was that some schools were, as I said, some were making returns that said these are our incidents. Others were saying that's a nil return, we don't have any, and a bunch of others were saying weren't even responding. And what we couldn't find in our inspections when we looked at the evidence bases was whether that had been followed up fully. It might have been and might not have been recorded, or
Yeah.
it might not have been. So we've been really directive now in our handbook to say that we ask the schools for this information, this reporting information, but you must follow it up, whether if you don't get a return, or and obviously if you do get a return, you talk that through and you look at the
Mm.
systems and processes of reporting and the part of the personal development that educates young people, and we look at that in the round. So that's the kind of focus that we want, because one of the things the work really identified was there's no point in people thinking, oh, if we don't get reports, it's not happening. You just got to
Yeah.
assume it is happening, and
Yeah.
how do you deal with that? And you
Yeah.
deal with it through education and respect,
Yeah.
basically.
Thank you. Um, Talking about reviews, you published some research reviews recently. The latest was the maths one.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know whether you've seen Twitter or not, but what are your thoughts about the research reviews, and about the way it has been, um, how has it landed with the sector?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, the maths was the latest one, but we've also done one for music,
Is it?
MFL, science, RE. So a number of different subjects now, both in the national curriculum and like RE, not in the national curriculum. So and actually generally they've landed very well. Yes, I've seen some of the comments about the maths one, and we're looking at the things that people have said and responding to those through our processes. Um, what do I think of it? I think these were reviews which brought together research that help to kind of codify, if you like, a kind of quality of education in the different subjects, which can inform the way that the education inspection framework is set up to look at subjects. They're not what we will inspect against, and I think that's
Okay.
probably what people have got a little bit
Hmm.
confused about.
Hmm.
So this is not an additional handbook. It's not an additional thing that we are going to say, right, this is what you need to do to when we look at a deep dive in maths or any other subject. It's actually just to inform what quality looks like in different subjects. So what will happen is that these will be a forerunner to the next part of work, which is to look at the state of the nation in subjects, and that will happen over the next year or so. So I'm not surprised that some people have found them a little bit contentious, because it's pulling together research, and research
Yes.
is contentious.
Yeah.
So it's all good debate.
I've just had a message. The history one published today looks great. Hats off to Tim Jenner.
Yeah, I mean
Really.
Tim and the team did a great job with that, and the way that it pulls together really useful research and to conceptualize, as I say, quality is really, really great. It goes back to what HMI did many years ago with things called the
Hmm.
Raspberry Ripples, and also the
Yes.
work they did on the national curriculum development. So in part part of it. It's about that kind of supporting the thinking in the sectors. And some things are contentious. Education is contentious, and so and that's probably what makes it such a fascinating thing to be in.
Which takes me to my next question. What's next for you now that you are moving away from Ofsted?
Well, so my wife and I are both retiring at the same time. I've just completed a master's in early modern history. My original subject was, of course, science, was physics, a degree in physics, but I've been getting into history the last few years, and I want to get into some more research in history. I've got a couple of things in my mind to do around the radical John Wilkes from the 18th century. I want to look further into. We're also going to work with a charity that teaches, so we're going to help adults to read, and also get fitter after COVID.
Yes. Well, especially after the pandemic. Yes.
Exactly.
Will you be coming back to Twitter?
Oh no, I don't think I'll be doing that.
Okay.
I don't think I'll ever. No one will want to hear probably no one will hear what I said before, but they'll be even less interested after I retire, I'm sure.
Well, no, we might quite like to read about your research into history and all of that. That would be interesting.
Oh well, yeah. I might be happy to share that. Yeah.
Right. One last question before I let you go. If you could make one change in Ofsted before you left, what would that be?
Oh, wow. I'd probably get rid of Section 8 inspections of good and outstanding schools. I think they were of use at the time. We brought them in 2015. I think they had a use. They were based on many years of inspection in different guises and data, etc. But I do think there's a question over in a post-pandemic and what schools have gone through, which makes the hypothesis that they're based on, which is that I'm going into a good school, or I'm going into an outstanding school, and you work off that. I think it's a difficult hypothesis to continue with. I'm being very honest, and I think therefore that we might have had a time post-pandemic where we went back to Section 5 inspections, so that we could get a baseline of what with the full inspection of how schools are. That's not to say it would all be bad, because this term over 40 schools have come out of special measures and serious weaknesses even after the pandemic. This term, following all that they've gone through, they went into the pandemic inadequate, and they've come out now and they're better schools. So it doesn't mean it would all be bad, but I do think that there's a question mark over that hypothesis, and therefore I think if Section 8 went now, just of the good and outstanding schools, I think, not the monitoring generally, I think we could be in a better place to set the system up.
Okay. Well, Amanda Spielman, if she's listening, hopefully she might take this on board, and let's see we can make this happen.
Well, you never know.
Yes. Got another message from Mike Tin. I think Sean underestimates how respected he is by many in the profession, and I second that.
Well, it's very nice of Mike to say that. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, we'll see, won't we?
Yeah. But I did promise that I won't take up your entire Wednesday evening. I'll let you get back to your family. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. I thought I'll just ask and try my luck, and you said yes, like you've always done when the people have asked you things. So thank you so much. Best of luck with whatever's next, and don't be a stranger. And if you do think of joining Twitter, let us know, and we can perhaps chat history and not talk about Ofsted anymore.
Yeah, that might be a pleasure. Thank you very much, Naureen, and thanks for all you've done. Thanks for all you've done as well over the years since I've known you, and also to people that I used to engage with on Twitter, but I've spoken to many of you since. So it's been a great ride. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye. So that was Mike. I really enjoyed. That was Sean. Really enjoyed that. he's a good sort, I think. I've always been a fan of his, but that doesn't hasn't meant that I haven't challenged him when I think things are wrong. But he's always listened, and I think that's really important. So we're going to now. Hopefully, I am. Mike is there and Mayan is there. I'm just going to. So Mike is about to join the studio. Hopefully, Mayan will join in as well, and then we can start the second uh, part of the show. There we go.
I
Lovely.
think I'm in, Naureen.
Yes, you are. Hi, Mike.
Excellent. Hi, Naureen. Can I
Hi.
just say how absolutely fascinating that conversation with Sean was?
Oh,
I mean, yeah, for me, he's always been so open and engaging on Twitter, and it was a huge loss. But listening to your conversation then, I wish we could have filmed it and made a TED talk out of it. I think it was absolutely fascinating listening
it
to
was,
how the
yes.
framework was formed and his thoughts on next steps. And it's a real loss to the inspection system that Sean is going. So
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah.
bringing him on. It was brilliant.
I think I really enjoyed that. I've like I said, always enjoyed chatting with Sean, but this was quite interesting to just go back into history, into time, when inspection started, when he joined, and talk about what's next and everything, and the new framework, and don't get people in to write your intent statements, etc. It's really interesting stuff. And those of you who want to listen to Sean again, once this show is finished, it will be published on the Podbean, and you can listen back to Sean again if you like. So there is that. Before we start chatting to Mike and Mayan, let's just take a little break for some news first.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful, and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Jeff Barton, General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, has expressed concerns over the pressure being placed on teachers by some families who are anxious to ensure their child secures grades required for university. He has told MPs that the union is offering legal advice to members on how to cope with parents who say they have a lawyer ready to challenge any grade which they do not agree with. Kevin Courtney, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, has voiced concerns about huge workload implications for staff over the summer. Students will find out next month what grades they have been awarded. The Department for Education has released figures which show that almost 1.5 million students were absent from school in England last week. The figures indicate that 840,000 were absent for COVID-related reasons and 630,000 were absent for other reasons. Kevin Courtney, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, told the Commons Education Select Committee that some students absent for non-COVID reasons would be suffering from mental health issues. Nick Brooke, Deputy General Secretary of the Association of Head Teachers, said that the attendance figures made for grim reading and showed that the DFE had lost control of the situation. A Year 4 class from Castle Park School in Caldecott are walking or running the entire length of the Wales coastal path virtually. Pupils are uploading their mileage into the website endtoend.run. At the end of the 870 miles of the coastal path, pupils will receive a collective medal as well as an individual certificate. To help the environment, pupils have asked for a tree to be planted rather than receiving the usual t-shirt. This has been your latest Teacher Talk Radio news.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. If you've just joined us, you've missed Sean Harford, really interesting chat with him. So do listen back when you've got a moment. But now we've got two wonderful guests with me now, Mayan Wakeford and Mike Thane. Welcome both.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Naureen. Hi, Mayan.
Yes, I can. Mayan is a primary teacher who is about to complete her NQT induction year. She has blogged extensively about her experience of getting into teaching as a 40 something career changer. She's also the organizer of Buffet Ed, which is a set of events where teachers can meet to talk about the experiences over a buffet of good food. Mike is a former head of maths, head of Department of Maths, and a secondary teacher since 2002. At the minute, Mike is on a break from the classroom and is using his time to tutor children in maths and volunteers as a primary school governor. So, welcome both.
Thank you.
Good to have you both with us. Mayan, first question to you then. What made you decide to go into teaching?
I was at a loose end. My son was just about to go into full-time school, and so I had been a full-time mum up till then. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to my former career, and I wanted to do something new. And then also I saw I had a fairly negative experience with him at his school. Several things happened which made me question the way he was being educated. So I started reading up on all things education, and the more I read, the more interested I got, and I went down into the rabbit hole. And then one January morning, as like a New Year's resolution, I decided, yes, that's for me. I'm going to go into teaching.
Right. What was your career first?
Well, I've had a very checkered career. I was a marketing consultant for many years. Then I had a web design company. And then I left all of that and trained as a reflexologist and an aromatherapist. I had my own clinic. I was making my own sort of homemade face creams and things like that, going all kind of new agey. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I was getting a bit bored. And then I paused that when I had my son, meaning to get back to it, but then it just kept being put off. And then eventually I realized I didn't really want to go back to it. I wanted to do something else, something a bit more maybe mentally challenging for me. And yeah, and then I went into teaching basically.
Oh, lovely. Mike, tell us about your journey into teaching.
Oh goodness. I wanted to teach really from about the age of 16. I was one of those people who sort of knew fairly early on that teaching was what I wanted to do, and um, you know, I knew some people who were going off to teacher training in college at the time. It was the old 4-year teacher training courses, the Bachelor of Science Education courses, and I visited the university that I trained at, which was at Exeter, and just fell in love with the place. And my journey started there really, and it was a fascinating 4 years at university. Some real trials and tribulations. The training process was hard, and then yeah, took a year out after graduating, and then hit teaching after that, and loved it for a very long time, and still do love it in many ways. Just a few things got in the way, unfortunately.
Ah, it's good to have two different two people on the show which have come to teaching from different routes. Mayan, um, what when you started teaching, and now that you are all finishing your NQT year, is it what you expected it to be?
Yes and no. Um, the actual teaching, planning lesson and teaching children was what I expected to be, maybe even more rewarding than I expected it to be. But other aspects of teaching definitely took me by surprise.
Care to elaborate on that? Which ones?
Just everything to do with how to manage a class, and just the ecosystem, sort of trying to. I'd been for so many years my own boss,
Mhm.
and suddenly having to fit in to sort of the rules and regulations. It was a bit of a change, yeah, big change for me.
Mike, was teaching what you expected it to be?
I think it probably was at the start. I think I started back in 2002, so before goodness, I mean, that first 10 years of teaching was a proper roller coaster. There was curriculum changes every couple of years. The Labour government wouldn't stop tinkering with it, and they wouldn't leave it alone. There was so many sort of buzzy things were coming in and out, a lot like it does now, to be fair. And it was a constant treadmill of hard work and struggles, and some really rewarding times as well. I was really lucky. My mentor as an NQT was just amazing. Um, I remember struggling at times with behaviour management in particular, and because I'm in a classroom environment, you know I'm not. I come across as quite a strict person, but actually, once you get past that, um, I like to have fun in the classroom, and I think I allowed that to happen too soon as a new teacher, and as a result, behaviour management for time was a bit of a challenge. And I remember to this day a phrase she told me, and she wrote it in a little book that she gave me when I left that first school. It says, she said, "Be a bitch like Mazza," which was just her way of saying, she was no nonsense. She
Mm.
didn't take any nonsense from the kids at all. But as a teacher, she was just extraordinarily good at it, and she just didn't take any nonsense from anyone, and that was her way of saying, you just got to be a bitch like me. Although she was actually a really lovely person underneath it all, and
Mm.
I think that stood me in good stead for a good few years, and then I gradually got promoted up. And I think the thing I found with teaching is no year was ever the same. Every year had its own challenges, and every year came with its own problems, but also its own opportunities. And it's really exciting to hear about Mayan's journey so far, and she's at that start of that journey. And as much as I've done 18 years, and I've left now temporarily, and it's always so nice to hear about new teachers and their love of what they do, and working with kids is amazing, and it is the most rewarding thing. And I miss working with children so much. It's like a part of me is not there. Um, and it's really exciting to hear about Mayan's journey, and other, like I say, other NQTs as well, and how they're progressing through their early careers now. I'm really excited about how the early careers framework is going to support new teachers as well. I think it's something that I didn't get 20 years ago, and I think the work that's gone into that's going to be really exciting.
So,
We'll see how that evolves.
are you a fan of the early years framework then?
Yeah, I think it's so important that I think when I started, you had your NQT year, and then you got thrown in year two, full timetable, no real significant mentoring support at all, and it was a real big leap. But I think having a longer period of time where you are learning the craft and teaching in
Mm.
the craft, and it takes a long time to really learn how to do it well.
Mm.
To do that with the greater amount of support the early careers framework comes with, and I haven't read the whole thing, but I know it does involve a longer process of learning your craft before you get lumbered with a full timetable, things like that are
Mm.
going to be so important for giving new teachers that time to really learn and understand what it is they're doing.
Okay, that's a good perspective to have on that framework. Interesting. Mayan,
Yeah.
do you think people who come into teaching from other careers, do they have an advantage or are they disadvantaged by not going into teaching straight from uni?
I don't think there's an advantage or a disadvantage. I think they bring something different to the table, and it's
Mhm.
good to have a mix in the teaching community.
Okay.
I wouldn't like to see all teachers having never done a job other than teaching. I think it's good to have that mix. They bring in different perspectives. Obviously, if their career changes, they're going to be more mature and have had many other life experiences that they can call on. So that's a positive. But there again, if you go straight into it because you know from an early age that's what you want to do,
Mm.
and it's kind of your calling, then that's great too. So it's just it's different, but I don't think any one of them is better than the other.
So we can't. There's no set rule. It depends. It depends on the person who's going in.
Very much so,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Mike, what do you think?
That's a really good question. And I think mine's response was absolutely on the money, but I'm coming at it now as someone who no longer is in the classroom
Mhm.
and works in industry. But I'm just now spinning up a STEM ambassadors project for the next couple of years, because I'm extremely passionate about getting young people involved in particularly STEM careers. But my employer is really looking to do a good piece of work for the next couple of years. And um, I think what people bring to the classroom who have got some relevant industry or any industry experience at all, actually, is that greater knowledge of potential future career pathways, which I think because careers support to schools has been so patchy for a number of years. There are some really good examples of it. There are also some schools that really struggle with careers sort of guidance and advice services. And having people in the school, teachers in particular, who have that awareness and knowledge of the world outside of education, they add so much value to that process of talking about careers
Mm.
and what children can do after school. You know, the idea of apprentices or university or college or going straight into employment. Having that sort of knowledge is such an important part of now what schools offer to children. And I'm really excited about the STEM ambassador opportunity because it gives me the chance now to go back to schools and feed that into the system and train up teachers as well as talk to children about and engage them in sort of STEM subjects in particular. So I think mine's point was on the money, but I do think there's huge value to career changes going into teaching because of that knowledge that those career teachers don't necessarily have.
That's such a great point. We've got a message from Sobia who says, it's a shame that we've been going on about STEM careers for decades and we are still having the same issues.
Yes,
Yeah.
front. No, I'm seeing now what it looks like from an industry perspective. I work in a top science industry, and the issues around recruitment, around diversity and inclusion. It's a hugely important issue, and what's really good to see is that industry are grasping that nettle,
Mhm.
and they're really taking some very positive steps to improve the situation. Which is why things like the STEM Ambassador Scheme and working with the National STEM Centre and things like Enthused Partnerships are so important because I really like the idea of this tag of people like me, and unless you see someone like you in a career, it can appear to be a very closed shop.
Mhm.
And so what I'm really keen to do is develop a network of ambassadors at my employer that reflects wider society. So we can go and engage with girls, for example, and have women who are top scientists, engineers, mathematicians, talk to them about their career to date and really inspire them to get involved. I mean, if I
Yeah.
went and did that as a white 42-year-old man trying to inspire a room full of excited, enthusiastic young women scientists, I wouldn't be able to connect as effectively, I think, as someone who is like them. And I think
Mm.
that's why it's such an important thing that we do
Mm.
that.
Mm. got another message, this time from Joe, who says, we are lucky here that we have quite a lot of military, and they're really trying to build partnerships with schools around STEM. So, again, same thing about trying to build partnerships and trying to make children and students aware that there is a huge world out there waiting for them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
she's
just.
right. I think the military are much more outward looking on that than they have
Mm,
been.
yeah,
And people
that's
can
good.
see the change in the military. They can see women now serving on the front line.
Yeah.
They can see an increasingly diverse um, sort of armed forces, which can only be a positive thing. And it's great that the military are doing so much outreach on that.
Okay. Um, Mayan, how are you finding your NQT year?
I've loved it. I've
Have you?
absolutely loved it. Um, it during your training year, I think I'll probably be echoing the thoughts of many other trainee teachers. It is, I can't wait until I have a class of my own. I can't wait until I have control over my environment and it's my class.
Yes,
Um, and so when you finally do get your own class, it's fabulous. I've loved it. It's been great.
wonderful. Uh, Mike, what was your NQT year like?
Oh goodness, that was 20 years ago nearly. That's a long time. I still had hair at that point,
Yeah.
and I wasn't quite as overweight, and I had a lot fewer wrinkles. No, my NQT, I had a really amazing team. The maths department I trained with as an NQT were just so incredibly talented and enthusiastic and energetic, and I think that made a huge difference to me. I was in a school; it was a large school in Surrey. There was 100, I think it was 103 teachers. 18 of them in my NQT were NQTs. So we had a really amazing sort of group of new teachers to enjoy that first year with. It was really hard, um, and having your own classes all of a sudden was good, but I think I wasn't as prepared for it as I could have been. I'd had a really tough last teacher placement in my fourth year, and so I went into the NQT year lacking confidence, and I think the year out possibly didn't help because I forgot some of the things I trained that I'd been trained with, and but I got to the end of it and I got through it really well in the end, and I think I wouldn't have done it without the people around me. I was also really lucky that my wife is a teacher as well, and being able to go home every evening and unload
Mhm.
with her, and that she understood because she'd been an NQT the year before. Um, that made a huge difference as well. I think that support network around you is hugely important, um, and having people in the school that understand what you're going through and are in the same situation, particularly if you've got NQTs in the same school, makes a big difference to the success of your training year. Um, so yeah, it was tough. Really enjoyed it. Stayed there for 2 more years. Had an
Yes.
amazing time with things like the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, and it was just really good. It was a great place to learn to teach.
Wonderful. Uh, you are, Mike, you're here to talk about line management. Now, some of my listeners aren't teachers. They're here because they just love Teachers Talk Radio. So, can you explain how line management works in schools?
I'll have a go. So, so within my career in schools, I got to a point where I was a middle leader. I didn't make it to senior leadership at the time, and should I go back into teaching, certainly that's something I would be interested in doing. But um, it will really vary from school to school. But what you'll have as a head of department in secondary schools, at least, because that was what I worked in, and I'm most familiar with, is you would normally have a line manager who is a member of the leadership team, so the senior leaders, and you'll meet with them regularly. You'll talk about things like whole school priorities. You'll look at systems and processes and how they're being developed. You'll talk about how you're supporting teacher development and training. You'll talk about curriculum, of course. Curriculum will be a huge conversation. You'll be looking at data tracking, and so all that stuff will go on. And I, so my view of the relationship between the middle leader and the senior leader is incredibly important, and those relationships can be quite different. You can have senior leaders who will be very much like a mentor and a coach, who will coax, question, encourage, kind of draw the answers out of you to the complex problems that you're trying to wrestle with. And you can also get some leaders who can be quite interfering, and quite directing, and which can be a challenge. It's particularly a challenge where you've got leaders who are not a specialist in your subject. Because as any of certainly the teachers on the listening to this will know, is that each subject, particularly at secondary, will have its own ways of being taught, its own pedagogy, and they will be different. There will be similarities. Some things will be similar across the subjects, but I wouldn't be able to go and teach English. I wouldn't be able to go and teach science and what have you, because I trained as a maths teacher. I understand the pedagogy of how to teach maths, and it's difficult to apply those principles to other subjects. And you can get schools where they'll direct and say, well, all subjects need to have the same systems and processes, which is just a nonsense.
Mm.
Sorry, that all schools have the same way of doing things,
Yeah.
not necessarily systems and processes, because consistency of systems and processes is important.
Yeah.
But you need to respect the differences between the subjects, which is another really important aspect of it. So you get different experiences of leadership, and I've been lucky that I've experienced some excellent ones. I've been unlucky that I've experienced some pretty shocking ones as well.
Okay. Mayan, previous to teaching, your careers where you were not working for yourself, how were you line managed there, and how different do you find that process as compared to how you're line managed now?
Um, I think before I worked for myself, I worked in a small consultancy, so my boss was literally sitting in the desk just on the other side of the room. So there was a lot of, it was very informal. Um, and so I've never really had the experience of being line managed in a very formal way where you have to sort of write your what are your sort of aims for this year, and then sort of have them reviewed and all that kind of stuff. So that's all new to me. um but yeah, so yeah,
Okay.
it's been
Yeah.
quite
Interesting.
different.
Quite different. Mike, I think this is a question for you from Sobia, who wants to know your thoughts on leadership training within schools. Does in-house leadership training or coaching work?
That's a potential grenade that you've just thrown in there. So I can only talk of my experiences, which is really important. I emphasise that,
Yeah.
and that any generalisations I make are very much based on my own experiences. But I think there's some really good leadership training that happens. I think the issue is certainly there's one aspect of the training I did. I did an MPQ ML. Oh goodness, 10 years ago I think it was. And there's lots of features of it that were really good. We did talk about coaching and mentoring in particular, which I think is a really important part of being an effective leader. But what you lack in schools, particularly as a middle leader, and particularly I found as a head of maths, a core subject, is you lack the time to practice. And it's only since I've left teaching, and now I'm 2 years out of the classroom, that I've had the time to practice good quality coaching and mentoring. And um, schools are relentless places, and the last 18 months in particular. And any leaders who have stepped up in that time will have just been swamped with work, and the workload has been ridiculous. But giving leaders time to practice the most important skills of leadership, which in my view will be about developing people, about mentoring, and about coaching, and about strategy as well. And if you don't give people time to practice those skills, they won't be as effective. And my
Yeah.
experience was that those skills that I was trained with, I just had no time to practice them, and that caused issues.
True, true. Um, Mayan, you and other entities, you've joined the profession during the pandemic. How has that impacted you?
I think the biggest impact was the period of lockdown where basically I spent all that time, all those weeks at home, and not being in the classroom, and I felt really robbed of
Mm.
that classroom time. I didn't feel like I was really teaching. I felt like I was just providing videos and resources for parents to do whatever they could at home. So it was treading water. It felt like wasted time. I was so desperate to get back into the classroom. So that was a negative. But there were also positives because of the pandemic. Everything became very inward looking. So there wasn't, there were less meetings, less sort of conferences. I mean, we had staff meetings and online things as well, but it felt like I was allowed to just get into my bubble and get on with it without interruption. And I wouldn't want that to go on and on and on, because obviously I'd love to go and visit other schools and see how other teachers are teaching. But I think for my first year to just be left in peace and allowed to just find my own way, but still have in the classroom next door my mentor who I could pop in and ask any question if I needed any help. So the support was there, but I was left to my own devices at the same time. And that was so empowering, because I'd been in previous schools where I felt there was so much intrusion from, senior leadership teams, from learning walks every 5 minutes. I just felt I was constantly under the microscope, and that didn't allow me to thrive. And so one of the great things about the pandemic is I just felt I was left to get on with things. And maybe that doesn't suit everybody, but it really suited me. It was great.
Because the pandemic meant you weren't micromanaged.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to take a little break for an ad and some news. I'll leave you with something to ponder over while we hear the news. Which my question is, in your opinion, what should line managers be doing if they are managing people teaching a subject which isn't their speciality? So I'll let you think over that, and we'll be back shortly.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsia puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.CRE8TIVEresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TT Radio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's Wednesday, the 14th of July. I'm Naureen Khalid, your host on The Late Show, and we are live on Teachers Talk Radio. I have with us Mayan Wickford and Mike Thane, and we have been talking about the routes into teaching and relationship between SLT line managers and subject leaders. Call in or text if you have any questions or observations.
Live from London, this is The Late Show with Naureen Khalid on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. So before we took a break for the ads, I asked Mike what was his opinion, what should, in his opinion, line managers be doing if they are managing people teaching a subject which isn't their speciality. So how should they manage them, Mike?
Okay. So I did a thread about this the other day, which is what prompted me to suggest this topic, and had some really, really helpful replies. I'll come to a couple of those in a minute, but I think I'll draw on a couple of themes, and one is around sort of where the department is at. So if you are running a subject, so say if you're new as a head of department and you're picking up a department that's not quite where it needs to be, and the school is aware of this, and they've got a school action plan, the ADIP or the SIP or whatever your school called it, and your subject's a priority area, they will throw lots of energy at helping to support and fix that. And that might require at times for the senior leaders, the line managers, to take a more assertive approach, and to potentially instruct as opposed to guide and support and mentor. And I think sometimes that's really important and valuable, and I think it's important for school improvement that the senior leadership are supporting and intervening where departments are struggling. But I think if you've got a department where it's well run, you've got an experienced subject leader who really knows their way, really knows their stuff, and has got good systems in place, the department is in a good place and is improving, then actually this is a situation where I think the style of leadership I've just described, that interfering style, that dictatorial style, is simply just not appropriate. There were some really helpful comments I got on this thread. Isaac Moore talked about they shouldn't interfere. Period. SLT can support the subject leader to have the needed knowledge and support. It's, Steve Waters talked about they shouldn't. In my view, a line manager creates the conditions in which the middle leader leads their department. I think that's so important that I always viewed leadership as creating the environment for my team to succeed, getting barriers out of the way, and freeing them to do their job. And I think that's what leadership at all levels should be like. But I do appreciate context is so important.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank,
so there's some initial thoughts anyway.
thank you. Mayan, what, in your opinion, would a good line manager looking after an NQT look like?
I think what Mike touched on is spot on. That line managers are there to create the best conditions for their teachers to thrive in. And going back to the earlier point about micromanaging, I think there's a very fine sort of line that gets crossed when there's too much micromanaging. Basically, I think the message that the teacher gets is, we don't trust you to do your job, and so we have to be spying on you all the time to make sure that you're doing your job properly, or we need to put things in place to make sure that you don't sort of go off the beaten track or whatever. So I think there has to be some trust in the teacher. That's not to say that teachers are allowed to do whatever they want, but there has to be that feeling that the teacher has to be getting that feeling that we have confidence in you, we trust your professional judgment, we're here to support you. And the minute that message is changed and tainted into, we're here to make sure that you don't mess up, that changes the tone. And then I think as a teacher, you start losing your confidence, you start thinking you're walking on eggshells, and it can really escalate from that. So it's really important, I think, to have that element of confidence and trust, and we have your back, we're there to support you. That has to be one of the most important things that you get from your line manager.
Yeah, I mean, people quite often make a comparison between teaching and medicine, and I think that's something medicine does well. Is when you're teaching somebody to do a complicated piece of surgery, you'll show them, but then you let them get on with it. Always being there just to interrupt if something goes wrong, but you will let the surgeon do the surgery. And I think teaching is a bit like that. Let them teach a bit. Let them build up their confidence that they can do it, but be there at the background to watch their back. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
Mike, you're a governor now, so we're almost coming to the end of the show. So this is a question I really wanted to ask. You're a governor now too. How can governors ensure that line management works well without getting embroiled in operational matters?
Oh, I had a feeling you'd ask me something like that. Because I have to be honest. At times, I do find the important distinction between strategic and operational is a challenge. Partly because of my 20 years in education up till now. I don't know. I think that I'd have to go away and think about that one a bit more carefully. I mean, I'm gonna dare I turn it around back on the host? I mean, what do you think?
I think make sure the processes are there, they're consistent. When you're doing appraisals, when you're talking to the head about appraisals, ask them how have you managed, how is line managing working, um, how can you assure me that your teachers have the confidence that, in what they're doing, how are you, what say do they have in setting the targets, how can you assure me that the targets are ambitious but at the same time they are achievable, how can you assure me that you are not micromanaging, that how are you building up the confidence of teachers, how are you making a classroom teacher who wants to go into middle leadership, how are you developing that leader, how a middle leader who wants to go into senior leadership, how are you developing those leaders. So I think it's questions like this which might give you an idea about how it's working in your organization. But
I think
yeah.
I might listen back to that list and just jot them down.
Okay.
'Cause that was a really good list.
Okay. We might continue chatting over this later on as well. Right. So, I mean, that passed away really quickly. We're almost to the end of the show. In fact, I think we are a minute over. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Mayan. Thank you, Mike, for coming in and chatting to us. Again, like I said, this is something we could have. Maybe I should bring you on another time when we could go through all the list of questions which I didn't get time to ask you. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I'll let you get back to your Wednesday evening now. Thank you, and
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.
Good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.